Merci Jean, nous continuons ce marathon du sens hein, et nous avons encore quelques exposés vraiment passionnants à venir. And it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome now Professor Rana DAJANI, who is an expert in microbiology. She is a professor of biology and molecular cell biology at the Biology and Biotechnology Department of the Hashemite University in Zarqa, Jordan. Currently, Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Germany. So she's coming from Berlin. And she has a lot of responsibilities in various venues. She likes to say that she has several scarves on her head, and including a worldwide initiative for teaching how to love reading to children. And now Rana will speak about the theory of evolution, and please join me in welcoming her.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. رح أتكلم أول جزء باللغة العربية للجمهور العربي. أنا سعيدة جدا أكون بينكم اليوم في بلد عربي، يعني خاصة جاي من ألمانيا، بلد عربي عريق وشهم. فيه شهم لعدة أسباب، بس بدي أذكر سببين. فيه أقدم جامعة في العالم أسسته امرأة اللي هي فاطمة الفهري عام 859، وفي فريق الرياضة الكرة القدم، ومش بس بفتخر فيه كمهارته بكرة القدم، ولو أني أنا مش يعني اكسبرت بالموضوع، بس لأنه هو أبهر العالم بخلقه وفرجة الإنسانية إنه نحن لازم نكون فخورين بهويتكم وبمين أنتم، لأنهم أنتم القادة في الخلق، والإنسانية اليوم بحاجة للخلق، وبحاجة نقيم مبادئنا وأهميتنا والنجاح مش بالشيء المادي، إنما بأخلاقنا وقيمنا، ونحن الحمد لله كذلك، فكونوا فخورين بأنفسكم. I'd like to start by acknowledging my mentors and role models who have inspired me over the years in my journey, in my career, in my life. Starting with my father, Professor Basim Dajani, who was born in West Jerusalem in 1948 and had to leave because of Zionist forces evicting him from Jerusalem. And then Professor Sufyan al-Tayeh, who was killed, he and his family, last week in Gaza. He was the president of the Islamic University of Gaza. And then the two scientists here, Ilham al-Khatib and Maha Samman. These are two female scientists in Gaza, in Palestine. We've been following since 2021. We wrote in Nature about them, documenting their hardships so that the world can know what they're going through. And we try to connect with them every day on WhatsApp to see how they're doing, how their families are doing because of the ongoing genocide and apartheid that's happening. So in the name of the thousands of scientists we are trying to document who have lost their lives and been killed, and the nurses and the physicians and the journalists and the students and the children and the women and the men, I want to have a 30-second minute of silence to honor them and that we can remember them as we are here today. Thank you. So the question is, what do we do now as scientists, as human beings? How do we go forward? Supporting humanity to build bridges. Is it possible? I want to say it is, because not far from here, a few centuries ago, there were Christians, Jews, and Muslims working together in Qurtuba, building science and building the basis of the science that we know today. All the inventions, whether in physics or chemistry or biology, they built those bases working together collaboratively in a beautiful atmosphere and ecosystem. And so there is evidence that this is possible. The issue now is how can we reimagine it going forward? And can we? And I think being here today and what's happening in Morocco, in this university, and the Center for Science and Quest for Meaning is a testimonial of a first step forward that yes, we can reimagine, we can come together and build a better future. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a story. You know, if we look back, I believe that as humans were evolving, there were two groups of people. There was a group of people who sat around the fire telling stories, and there was another group of people who looked at those telling the stories and frowned upon them and accused them of wasting their time. But you can imagine which group actually survived. It was the storytellers, right? So in the spirit of evolution and storytelling, I'm going to share with you my story, how I grapple with these issues as a Muslim, as a scientist, as a human being. I grew up as a Muslim, and to me, Islam was about to live in harmony with all the creation around me. And I cite many verses here of the Quran. I'm not going to read them. You can read them, which explain and delineate what is my role as a human being on earth, as somebody who has to take care of the earth around them. And to me, therefore, the Quran is a book that guides me on how to live my life with my fellow human beings and creation around me. It's not a book of science. It tells me I need to use my mind. It tells me I need to use my brain. But it doesn't give me the answers. Otherwise, life would be boring. So because of that, we are encouraged to be curious. We are encouraged as Muslims to ask questions, which is fundamental not just to be a Muslim or a scientist. It's fundamental to being a human being. We're humans and we survive because we're curious. And I like to quote this verse from the Quran when Abraham, and I'm paraphrasing here, asks God to show him how he can bring back the dead back to life. God didn't say you can't ask that question, that's a red tape question. He encouraged him to ask that question, and he proceeded to show him physically how he does that. So to me, that's the scientific method. That's showing evidence on how to do it. And the other beautiful thing about Islam that I grew up with is, other than that there's no red tape for any question, you can ask as many questions as you want, but also that it's okay to make an error in your judgment. And you will get a reward, 2 rewards if you get it right, and 1 reward if you get it wrong. So there's nothing to lose. Just keep asking questions, trial and error as you go on. And that's how I proceed to grapple with the world around me. And so one of the guidelines of the Quran is to celebrate, we have a brain, we have a mind, and we need to use it. And so many verses asks us and encourages us to look around us and observe nature and ask questions. And to me, in that verse, spelled out is the scientific method. And that's why Muslims, scientists, and scholars were able to have a healthy balance between their religion and nature around them and ask those questions and to make those discoveries in science. And in that context, scientists are humans, and so it doesn't matter which religion they come from. They could be Jewish, Christian, Muslim, agnostic, Buddhist, it doesn't matter. They're humans, and they're going to ask questions. And that's why we celebrate asking those questions, even if they get it wrong. And I love this quote by, I'm going to give you some homework. You can't get out of here without homework. You know, we're all professors. So you have to guess who said this. But I love it because he said, he was a Nobel Prize physicist. He said, see, a scientist is seeing what everybody sees, but thinking what no one has thought. But I want to add, it's not just the scientist, it's every human being. And so, as scientists, we look around us, we observe biodiversity and the beautiful nature around us. And as scientists have been doing that for millennia, we have scientists from the Islamic tradition, like Al-Jahid, Ibn Miskawayh, and Ikhwan al-Safa, who have made similar observations and came up with rudimentary theories to the theory of evolution. And then later on, Darwin came along, another scientist, who also made observations and came up with a theory of evolution and natural selection. Trying to explain the unity and diversity of life, which, as we know, very simply put, is that species change over time, species are derived from common ancestors, and that Earth and life are very old. And from an Islamic point of view, there's no contradiction in those tenets at all. And even after Darwin published his book, The Origin of Species, later on, Al-Jisr in 1880, in what is now Lebanon, and Ahmad Midhat and others, had no problem with the theory of evolution. It was compatible with Islam. unlike how Darwin was received in other parts of the world. And so, from my perspective, just as scientists are discovering the physics laws that were talked about earlier today, and as Muslims we have no problem, also scientists discovered the biological laws to explain how diversity of species came about. And we should not have a problem with that either, as these verses show us. And actually, whether people who are Muslims want to agree or disagree with evolution, or anyone for that matter, we actually practice evolution. You know, all farmers all throughout millennia have been actually practicing artificial selection. You know, the food you just ate at lunch, the tomatoes, the cauliflower, the broccoli, the potatoes, they didn't look like that. They didn't taste good, they didn't look good, they didn't smell good, but farmers kept on selecting and selecting and selecting every round until we got the delicious vegetables and fruits that we eat today. Not just that, with the advancement of molecular biology and the discovery of DNA, and my colleague earlier talked about the sequence of DNA and how it arranges itself, and we know now that every living organism shares the same molecule that preserves its genetic heredity, which is DNA. And it's made of 4 molecules. And what's different between one species and another, and even individuals amongst us, is just how those are ordered in a sequence. And the difference between us as a population, individuals within Homo sapiens, is less than 0.011, right? And so even between species, we can trace where our common ancestor came just by comparing the similarity in our DNA. Which brings us to the coronavirus, right? So even in understanding where the coronavirus came, how it evolved, the different strains that we all had, and the different vaccines we've taken, that's all based on evolution and laws of evolution. And even the severity of our response to corona, some of us unfortunately had passed away, some of us had very severe COVID and had to be hospitalized, and some of us, you know, were around everybody having corona and they never had corona and they never got infected. So the severity is a result of the diversity of our DNA. Specifically in the case of corona, the receptor on our cells, how much it binds to the proteins on the surface of the virus, is one way of how we respond differently. And actually that relates to our common ancestry and mixing with other species of which relate to our family of Homo sapiens, which are the Neanderthals, which were mentioned earlier as well. So those who had larger percentages of Neanderthal genes responded more severely to COVID, as we later found out. And the person who's the expert on Neanderthals won the Nobel Prize last year, Pablo Savate, as you can see here. So also another example of how we practice evolution and use it in our everyday life is when we take antibiotics. I've been very sick, and graciously, Yasmin brought me some antibiotics, but if we don't take the whole course of antibiotics, right, the bacteria will keep on mutating and slip and get away and come up with a much more virulent strain, and that way we can't kill it. So taking your full course of antibiotics is very important, and we only know this when we understand the laws of evolution. Which brings me, it's not that just genetics that makes up who we are, our phenotype, how we present ourselves to the world, but it's also how we interact with the environment around us. And how we interact with the environment around us and how that impacts our DNA is called epigenetics. And that's my field of research. So what does epigenetics mean? So you have your DNA, as you can see, which is wrapped tightly into what we see under a microscope as a chromosome. And when we wrap the DNA, we wrap it around proteins to help really fold it tightly. Now, if a gene is turned on, you unwrap the DNA, so it's exposed and can be transcribed and translated into a functional protein. If that gene is turned off, it's tightly wound, so it's not exposed. Now, how tightly wound the DNA is, or not wound tightly, relates to modifications on the proteins around the DNA. And those proteins, histones, there's many ways to wrap them tightly. One of them is methylation, which is adding a small chemical to the protein. And so, to the protein. And so when we're exposed to the world around us, the environment, whether it's drinking something, a lifestyle, or even listening to my lecture could actually change your epigenetics. So I don't know if you want to continue my lecture or you want to leave before you're changed forever, or not necessarily forever. But your genome does not change throughout your lifetime, but your epigenome does, right? Whether it's at the level of the zygote, or as a fetus inside the womb of your mother, or later as you grow up, as a teenager, or as an older person. And so your epigenome will change as a result of the exposure to the environment, which is good news because that means it's malleable, it's agile, it can change. You're not destined just because of your genetics. You have some control. So another way of putting it is that we have this epigenetic clock, which accelerates with aging, more oxidation, as a result of different exposures that could result in health consequences, diseases, etc. because of exposures, whether to trauma or abuse or just bad lifestyles. But the good news is you could reverse that epigenetic clock by eating healthy, by doing exercise, by reading, by praying, by having faith, and many, many other ways. And so I work in epigenetics on trauma. That's what interests me, because I'm a daughter of refugees, and Jordan, where I live, is unfortunately a haven for refugees. We have refugees from Palestine, from Syria, from Iraq, from Yemen, from Sudan, from Somal. We even have refugees from Ukraine. So you name it, we have it. Now, when people study trauma, when I entered that field, I realized that many Westerners, when they study trauma, they think it's a one-time event. But what we've come to realize that it's not a one-time event. It's a continuous process that's happening all the time. Look at Palestine, 75 years. So we can't treat it as a one-time event. And we need to look at it as a complicated exposure, a complicated response, and something that is related past, future, and present all together. So how do we study it? And why does it always is looked upon as a negative framework? And I wanted to challenge that, because from an evolutionary perspective, if we as humans have been exposed to different types of trauma all throughout our evolution, and we have survived, we have thrived, we have flourished. So can we put a positive framework instead of a negative framework? Can we look at people who are going through trauma in different ways, because trauma is relative, right? It doesn't always, it's very subjective. Can we look at it instead of from a lens of deficit to a lens of identity, dignity, and somebody, a child, an adult, a teenager is thriving? And that's what I am trying to change by looking at trauma in a positive way and how we respond to it, and looking at resilience. Studying resilience in children and teenagers, not just by conducting surveys, but looking under the skin at biomarkers, but more so, trying to understand how people define their response to trauma from their local culture, their local context, their local faith. Because most surveys and frameworks are very Western. And so they come in trying to understand the behavior and the meaning of empowerment, resilience, from a very different culture. And so there are new ways that we are employing, trying to understand what is the mind map, what is the mindset of individuals, communities, and how they perceive the world around them. And then from there, understand how they cope with trauma and how they flourish and survive. And that brings me to, remember we talked about epigenetics, that we can change our response to the world. And one of those ways is trying to understand how interventions can reverse the impact of trauma or other harmful lifestyles. And one intervention that I started in 2006 is called We Love Reading. And this is an intervention that trains women and men and youth who are volunteers in their neighborhood to read aloud to the children in their neighborhood in their native language in a local public space, whether it's a mosque, a church, a community center, under a tree, or on the stairs of an apartment building. And what happens is that the children themselves fall in love with reading and discover their inner self in the world around them, and their mental health improves. But what we've discovered is that the adults themselves find their voices literally by reading aloud and figuratively by becoming leaders in their own community, which improved their mental health, and they became change makers in their own right. So our mission is changing mindsets through reading to nurture change makers. We Love Reading has spread today to 65 countries around the world, and so it's been called a movement of good change, a positive virus, a good virus. And we've done research on the program. First, we wanted to establish, does it really change the children's executive functions to do better at school? And indeed it did. Then we wanted to look, does it change their emotional perception, especially those children who are exposed to war and displacement? And indeed it did. And then we wanted to ask, does it impact epigenetics, right? If children have been exposed to trauma, is their biological clock reversed? And can we actually reverse it back through an intervention as simple as reading aloud to a child? So this is in the making. We've collected our samples and we're analyzing the DNA as we speak. But we wanted to go further. We wanted to ask, can an epigenetic change be transferred across generations? We know it happens in mice, but nobody has proved it biologically, causally in humans, only retrospectively and not causally. And so we were actually lucky that we were able to access a whole cohorts of families where the grandmother was exposed to trauma. In 1980, there was a big massacre in Syria. My mother is Syrian from Aleppo. So we, because of the trust of the community in building those research relationships and helping the community assess itself, so that giving them dignity back, to understand what happened to them and how they can reverse it, we were able to conduct those studies, and we just submitted our results to Nature. And hope so, keep fingers crossed that we get published. And what we found is that there were 34 genes that had a differential epigenetic pattern on the whole genome, epigenome of course, that was transferred from those grandmothers that were exposed to trauma compared to controls who were not exposed to the trauma or the massacre in 1980. And as my daughter loves to say, "Oh, Mama, so you study the immortal kiss of our grandparents." And this is one of the stories that we created 33 children's books in Arabic and in English for the children of We Love Reading. And actually, I have one of them here. And this story is very special to my heart because it talks about evolution. And it talks about a girl, her mother and grandmother, who were all scientists, and how she discovered her mother and grandmother's results, and that's how she discovered the peppered moth, which is the typical evolution example that everybody knows in evolution. And so, as I end now my talk, what I've discovered is that in order to advance science and do better science, but also to serve humanity, because as scientists, ultimately that's our goal as well, we can't work in silos. We have to work interdisciplinary. We have to follow our curiosity wherever it takes us. And to me, that's what happened to me. My career was about following my curiosity wherever it took me, which made it fun. I never get bored, because every day there's a new thing that I'm going to learn or explore or discover. And we must never forget the humanities. And that's what's so wonderful about this university, that you have a humanity component, that students graduate well-rounded, studying philosophy, studying business, entrepreneurship, and society. And this is a new institute in Jordan. I put it up, but now I need to add your also centers as exemplars in the Arab world of studying philosophy and the humanities. Because as I said when I started, we will not maybe advance the world with technology, but we can in terms of humanities and social science from the Arab world to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals that we all know about. But also, we were part of driving, establishing a new UN resolution, which is called the UN Resolution for Social and Solidarity Economy, which says that if we're going to move forward and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in time, or at least before 2094, as the calculation says, we need to bring in government, private sector, and the civic society to sit together at the table to solve the problems. And I want to add academia, right? Because academia is the cornerstone of doing good to humanity in a scientific way. And so, in conclusion, I tell my students that we should strive to teach, to develop a rational methodology of assessing the natural world around them, and to think independently, to come up with their own opinions, hypotheses, and theories. So it's really not about whether you agree with evolution or you don't, you agree with this concept or not. It's about what do you think? What is your opinion? And always ask yourself that. And if we succeed in that endeavor, where the students have their own individual opinion that they think through, then the rest of the controversies that appear on the surface actually will dissolve and go away. Especially those, because I hear a lot of discussions between students about how do they balance between science and their religion as Muslims. So those will go away if you are thinking on your own, and you will contribute to the next generation. And it's not about black and white. It's about a fluid relationship between the different disciplines and different sciences. And going back to our role on earth, from an Islamic perspective, it's a framework that Islam provides that helps us guide us through the ethics of what to do with our discoveries. How do we use it to help our fellow humans and the earth and universe we live in? And therefore, religion is not about questioning the science, nor is it about trying to make the scientific discovery compatible with religious text. The realm of religion is giving a framework to explore and guidance on how to deal with the discoveries that we make. So in conclusion, if there appears to be a contradiction between religion and science, what do you do? First, I tell them, check the science, because the science is always changing and evolving. Check the tools, because the tools are evolving. Remember our limitations as species. Biologically, we are limited in our knowledge and what we can comprehend. And then, check those interpretations of the Quran that appears to be contradictory, because it was done by humans, and they err. And create committees of multiple stakeholders to re-evaluate those interpretations regularly and all the time. And always remember that multiple opinions is very healthy, and that's part of the beauty of Islam and the plurality of Islam, and learning and studying philosophy. So the problem, why do I talk about evolution? To me, like I said, you're eating your vegetables, you're taking your vaccines, and you're taking your medicine. So why do I talk about it? Because I want controversy? No. But the reason is, as I told you, in the history of Islam, we never had a problem between Islam as a religion and science. So to me, why suddenly in this past century we had a problem? And so that makes me think, what other problems have we imported into our communities and societies that came from Western globalization or colonialism? And how can we identify them so we don't fall prey to them, and we think on our own who we are, what is our identity, and how we can move forward? And that's how we celebrate plurality. And in order to achieve the grand challenges of the 21st century that are grouped in the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to work interdisciplinary, we need to be innovative, we need to have teamwork, and we need to have the courage to engage, to listen, and to fail, and to agree to disagree. And remember, your DNA is different from anyone else that has ever lived, that lives today, that will live tomorrow. Even if you're identical twins, because of epigenetics, you're slightly different. And so if somebody tells you, if you want to solve a problem in your community, go ahead and do it. And if somebody tells you, who are you? You're just a drop in the ocean. You tell them, but what is the ocean except millions of drops? And write your story. I urge you, I encourage you to write your story, because if you don't write it, somebody else will write your story. And you owe it to the future generation for them to read your story in your voice. And just so that I don't preach what I don't say, I wrote my book, which I'm going to send as a gift, as a PDF to the university. And it's called, as Bruno said, 5 Scarves Doing the Impossible. And it's in Arabic and in English. So I will end with the chaos theory in physics, which is my motto. When a butterfly flutters its wings in one part of the world, it moves the air a centimeter, which results in a hurricane beyond time and space that you can imagine. So go ahead and be the butterfly of change. Trust in yourself, trust in the people around you, and you can be the change maker to make it a better future for the world and for humanity. Thank you very much.